Scotia is the main person in this, but a subtitle, Lost Sister of Tutankhamun. Obviously, she is not particularly well known in that role, and some people might even say, "Well, is that the case? Was she Tutankhamun's sister?" And I would say, yeah, absolutely.
Well, hey everybody, welcome back.
Hey everybody.
I'm Logan.
And I'm Nicole.
And this is Generation X Paranormal. So today we've got someone that we've spoken to before. Mm-hmm. We have Luke Eastwood on. And we're real excited to talk to him, but what can you tell us about Luke?
So Luke was on for our Samhain episode. It was really great, and you should go back and listen to it if you haven't. He had wrote a book about that. Mm-hmm. But he's back because he has authored a new book. Yeah. So he is an author. He's a practicing druid, and he lives in Ireland. But we're here to speak to him today about his new book, Scotia, the Lost Sister of Tutankhamun.
Yeah, and I'm a big fan of that stuff, so I'm super excited to talk to him about this.
Yeah, it's going to be super interesting.
Yeah, can't wait.
Yeah, so let's talk to Luke.
Let's do it. Well, hey, Luke, how you doing?
Hi. Thanks for having me back.
Yeah, for sure. No, we're excited to have you back. I'll be honest with you, it was probably really one of our better received videos in a while.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's good.
For the folks who don't, for folks who don't know, we had Luke on for Samhain, and kind of explaining the origins of Samhain and what we call Halloween. It was very well received.
Flash my book up and plug it one more time. There you go.
Absolutely.
There you go.
Perfect.
Yeah, check it out. It's awesome.
Please do.
That's what it's called.
Absolutely. Yeah, when we had a blast. And I think for our audience, they're always really intrigued because, granted, we do have a pretty good worldwide audience, but, obviously the majority of it is here in the States. So they're not always quite as in tune with, some of the other views, some of the other traditions, especially like a druid tradition. They're not typically that attuned to it, although they celebrate all of it and they don't realize it. But
true.
But yeah, it was fantastic, and we have you on because obviously you had asked to come back because you got a book coming, and we saw. I'll be honest with you, I'm not as familiar with it. I know of it, but it's extremely interesting. But anyway, for those who haven't listened to the first episode or watched the first episode, if you could kind of just give us a real quick breeze over yourself, so those who don't know and haven't watched the other show, kind of give us a quick little information about Luke.
Okay, well, I guess I'm originally from northeast Scotland, and I moved away when I was a kid down to England, and I lived there till I was 29. I worked in America very briefly I was about 6 months in America. I'm traveling around back to London. I spent 10 years in London altogether. And then I moved to Ireland with my then wife, who's Irish. Anyway, so I've just ended up staying here ever since. And this is my home now. So I've been here for nearly 26 years, I think. So when I had started into this whole druid thing back in London, but I suppose most of that learning process has been here in Ireland. So, that's pretty much what I'm steeped in this sort of Irish version of neo-druidism, I suppose. Right. I call it neo-druidism because it's like we are different from the original Druids, of course, because there's this long period of time. I mean, paganism kind of disappeared and reappeared. So I think it's important to distinguish between the two, because it's changed. I mean,
Absolutely.
even Christianity has changed enormously. Uh, and like
Dramatically.
Judaism's
Yeah.
changed an awful lot from when it first started, and various other religions. I actually went to
Yeah, I
Turkey,
think that
and there's some really ancient chapels in this. I can't remember the place where it is now. The name escapes me. But these kind of strange volcanic hills, and they're easily carved. So it's soft rock. So they made all these chapels and built, buildings in the rock. Some of the
mm,
earliest Christian churches there, where they painted the ceilings and stuff. And the iconography
yep.
and everything is just so different from now, from what you get in a
Oh,
modern
sure.
Right.
church.
Yeah.
So, in like whatever, they're like 200 AD. So 1800 years later, you've got something that's completely and utterly different from the early church. And I think it's the same with all the paganism, the different forms of paganism. They're not the same as what it would have been back in the day, And I'm
Right.
kind of
Right. Yeah.
fascinated with, say we were talking about where things come from. As a general thing, I suppose since I was a kid, someone say this is that and it's like that, and I'd be like, oh, why is it like that, and where did that come from? And quite often people are like, oh, just shut up, I don't know, or stop asking difficult questions.
Right.
Right. Well, yeah, so many people are so they hate challenge. They hate to be challenged for their views, and I think it puts some people off. And I think that's really kind of a travesty because you don't learn from those things. And
No, not at all.
yeah, but especially when it comes to, and you had mentioned, kind of the transition of how certain religions have become more, either they've adopted some new views, some different feelings about certain things. I think you would have to do that as a religion in order to be able to be. I mean, you'd have to be with the times. You'd have to know that the people who are trying to follow a religion have to understand it, and if they don't, and it doesn't adapt to them, then you really don't have anything. So whether that's good, bad, or indifferent, I don't know. I'm not a theologian, so whatever is their thing. But I think if you don't adapt to it, I mean, it's just going to probably be one of those things where it turns into an ancient practice that is no longer used.
Yeah, that can be the case. I mean, I think there's two cases there. Really, either you become like fossilized and sort of like incredibly authoritarian and theocratic, and there are religions like where there's just total rigidity and there's no room for change.
Right.
And or you're going to go the other way where it morphs over time. It's going to adapt. It's going to change. Obviously,
Mhm.
if you don't have core values that remains the same, then
Yeah.
it would be a bit
Yeah.
ridiculous. It'd be a bit of pathetic religion if it doesn't stick to its principles. But the practice, the way it's expressed, and whatever, people, societies change, people change, and there's an evolution in human behavior, consciousness, social behavior, whatever. So, of course,
Right.
yeah, it's bound to happen that religious practices will change over time. If they're
Absolutely.
allowed to, if that's what people want and they are permitted to change things a little bit, then it will inevitably change.
Yeah. Absolutely. Or you get labeled potentially a heretic, which kind of rolls really well into what we're going to be talking about today. Um, so let's talk about the book.
Yeah,
And I'm going to let you. I'm going to let you go ahead and
got
run
a
with it,
rough
but
here which I
kind
can
of give
show
us
you
a
if you
real
want to have a
quick.
quick look. There, am I holding right? There
Sure.
you
Yeah.
go.
Awesome.
So it's
I like it. Yeah.
as you can see, Scotia is the main person in this, but a subtitle, Lost Sister of Tutankhamun. Obviously, she is not particularly well known in that role, and some people might even say, "Well, is that the case? Was she Was she Tutankhamun's sister? And I would say, yeah, absolutely. But then, I've everyone has their own take on this. Egyptologists and archaeologists disagree about various things. And I suppose it all goes back to Akhenaten, the heretic king, the monotheist Egyptian pharaoh. And like he had 6 daughters. So what you can be pretty sure of is one of these 6. And by like process of elimination and various bits of evidence, I think is a really strong case. It's the oldest daughter, Meritaten, who is Scotia. And for a long time, people accepted this story as genuine. And then you got into like the 20th century, very late sort of 19th century into the 20th century, and you go, oh no, this is all a load of rubbish. It's just a story. It's just, mythology. But then what's happened since then is there's been a load of archaeological evidence, there's been a load of DNA evidence, etc., which has then kind of swung it back the other way by going, wait a minute, this is like really incredible, this evidence. And you stack up all the evidence together of, proof that the Egyptians did travel a long way, that they made it to the UK, that their artifacts are in Ireland. And I think one of the, there's various burials which show links with the Egyptian pharaohs. In fact, there's a general DNA link across Europe, which you'll find is a connection to the Egyptian dynasties. And the strongest you'll find is right on the west. I think Spain is pretty strong, and in Ireland and Britain, it's like the most extreme connection. So that's pretty bizarre. So
yeah,
there's, I mean, without going through the entire book, I could list off everything that points towards this. But what I've kind of done is it's like a detective story where you're kind of following all these clues to point to the end thing, which is this woman called Scotia, who's in all these stories, is buried in an obscure part of Ireland in the far west, at the very beginning of what's called the Dingle Peninsula. In the bottom of a mountain range called Slieve Mish, there's these 2 graves there. And one is, by legend, they haven't ever exhumed them. One is her, and the one next to it, which is a bit less fancy, is her horse. And the story, there was this massive battle between what's come to be called the Malaysians, the Gaels, against the people who were already there, who were in charge. It's the Tuatha De Danann, the people of Dana, the goddess Dana, and or Danu or Anu. And they actually won that battle against the Tuatha De Danann, and they eventually kind of beat them all together. But she apparently fell from her horse and died, and the horse died too. And if you, the sort of foothills of those mountains where she's buried, you can see it's not flat. It's not like super mountainous, but it's sort of getting into the mountainous terrain, and there's rocks everywhere and very undulating ground. So I could imagine that you could easily be thrown from your horse, or the horse could stumble, break a leg or whatever, and you're like, bang, and you're dead. And that happens all the time. Even today, people have horse accidents, and I actually knew someone that happened to, that they were killed in a horse accident.
Oh, really?
I didn't really know her really personally, but but so just as an example that this kind of stuff still happens to this day, that people are killed in accidents riding horses. And that's not in the middle of a battle. That's just like, riding your horse.
Yeah, sure.
So
absolutely
uneven ground and rocks and everything. I could see where that could happen.
I'm curious too, because if she obviously coming from Egypt, unless you go to some of the very far ends of Egypt, they don't have as much rock. I mean, obviously, if you're like which I know is not Egypt per se, but there are some places like, I'm I'm trying to think where maybe Jordan or something like that, where they have a lot of rock and a lot of things like that. But other than that, I think as far as Egypt's concerned, there isn't a ton of that type of topograph.
Is that part of Ireland? Like I know certain can be kind of boggy. The ground can
it's
be kind
very,
of
very
boggy
rocky.
and wet and
The west of
saturated.
Ireland has got a lot of mountainous areas. In fact, the tallest peak in Ireland is in Kerry, which is, you know, her grave's in Kerry. The whole area is quite mountainous, you know. And going back what you said about Egypt, right? What happened was Akhenaten moved his capital to a place called it's the Amarna, the area it's called. Uh, I think he called the capital Akhetaten. Anyway, actually, all around there on the east coast of east bank of the Nile, uh, it is all rocky there. Behind that, there is a big load of rocks, and that's where they built the tombs and stuff. And they got most of the rock to build the city from that area. But you're generally right. There are little bits of pieces in Egypt where there's a big load of rock, and then there's like just plains and sand and whatever, you know. But yeah, it's not. There isn't vast stretches of mountain or like in Egypt. You know, it's a very kind of mostly flat, fairly flat country, really, I suppose.
Yeah, unfortunately, my only experience with Egypt was going through the Suez Canal, and from that side, there is no mountains anywhere. No. So that's
can you
about
see
the
very
most
much
I've had
on the canal, or are you like too low down to see anything?
Well, first of all, I was in an aircraft carrier, so we could see everything. Wow. And you see quite a bit. And it's everything that I guess, what you classically think of seeing something in Egypt, you know, very sandy, very desert, very arid. But what's interesting is you do see in little spots green things growing, which I thought was just so weird. But, you know, of course, we're next to water. But I just find that really interesting that you kind of have that little bit of like oasis thought to yourself about, oh, wow, you know, you could see where that would make sense. But no, for the most part, from what you can see in the Suez, however you want to pronounce it, on an aircraft carrier, which is 9 stories from the water line. Yeah, you could see quite a bit.
Yeah, that would make sense. It's pretty tall, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah. But it's gorgeous. Yeah. It's really cool going through there. Unfortunately, the way I went through there, we were kind of a sitting target. So unfortunately, my view came while I was holding a weapon, which is not any way I'd want to visit a country. But still, it was interesting. But I guess kind of going back to this, I absolutely don't want you to give away the farm, because I have a feeling this is going to be something people are going to want to read right away. With that sort of person coming to, you know, ancient Ireland in that area, what do you think, or were there any changes in how people were? Or maybe did it change architecture? Do you think it changed any way that the folks that were there that first got to meet her on through history, was there any impact to that?
Well, it's really hard to know because, for a start, the Gaels or Gaelic people would have been considered foreigners themselves at that time. They were coming from Spain, and sort of her entourage and the people she was with, generally, and you know, the story's called the Sons of Mill, and another place her husband's called Gaethos, possibly came from Scythia, which is sort of Ukraine, Russia area today. So well, it's really hard to know exactly, but like it would seem that she was rescued by somebody, and it's hard to know exactly who they were. There's certainly very ancient letter where somebody, it's because of the way they did their names, it's not very obvious who was writing. A woman who was like you know, a pharaoh's wife, wrote this letter asking to be rescued, and there's this ancient record written in cuneiform, which was like, you know, that's the Sumerian Babylonian script, which was still in use
Mhm.
for international stuff, like English would be today. That would be the international language at the
Mhm.
time, before Greek became the
Right.
international language, and then after that was Latin, and then it became, I suppose, probably Spanish for a while, and then English. But in this old tablet, she's like, "Help! I'm really in trouble. Can someone come rescue me and get me out of here?" You know. So
Mhm.
there may have been more letters like that, but there's only one that's on record. So she was rescued
Mm.
and fled. So the people that she fled with, we don't know for sure, but she may have had an entourage with her from Egypt, and maybe managed to organize like a whole bunch of her supporters, and she may have had like I imagine that they had some kind of imperial guard, whatever. There would have been servants, etc. They'd have gone on ships. Certainly, the Egyptians had seagoing ships. It could have been
Oh
the
yeah.
Phoenicians or somebody like that, that took her away. We don't really know for sure, but
Mm.
so she would have arrived with into Spain with this group of people. They didn't stay there that long. They had to leave. Things didn't go very well in Spain, and so they ended up coming to Ireland. So um, they basically came as an invasion force. Now her name like reverberates through Irish history and Scottish history, but so she's an enormous legacy. But herself, she may have died almost immediately. We don't know how long she was in Ireland before she died. She could have been here like
Mm.
2 days. We don't know
Right.
exactly how long after they got here that battle took. There were incursions. There was certainly um, there's one of the sons of Mill called It, who um, came here and then went back to Spain. And I think when he came back, he got killed somehow. He was the first person to get killed of their party, I think. And
Mm.
so there was a exploratory trip here, and then they decided to come, and then they tried to invade, and then they had to fight the Tuatha people, and there was this huge thing. I don't know if you've ever heard of this sort of Druid guy called Emergin. He's like the chief Druid guy. There's this famous poem, the Song of Emergin, which is all about how they managed to essentially they actually did a deal with the three tutor goddesses of Ireland that if they promised to sort of like worship them and remember them forever, then they'd be able to come here and to defeat the Tuatha, and they'd have the blessings of the land, blessings of the gods, if you will. So this all happened around that time. So it doesn't tell you exactly the time frame, whether you're talking about days, weeks, or a few months, how long this went on for.
Mm.
But anyway, in this one of the early battles, she gets killed, right? She's
Mm.
already got some
Mm.
children. Let's not like in big detail about all that, but her descendants went on uh, to become like the modern Irish Gaels, and then her
Okay.
descendants also went to Scotland, and then there's a whole load of mythology around that. That's where Scotland comes from.
Mm.
The name comes from
Mm.
her name, Scotia or Scotia.
I did not know that.
That's what I'd heard that before.
Scroll.
That's so interesting.
Yeah, and
So
you
Yeah.
always wonder. Oh, go ahead. I'm
So
sorry.
she may have actually literally been in Ireland for like a couple of days, even actually on the land, because obviously they spent a good bit of time trying to get into Ireland and failing and having to like retreat in their boats. And so we don't really know
Yeah.
how long she actually spent in Ireland, but we do know that she did come
Hmm.
here and that she died and was buried here. So her personally, how much
Wow.
of a influence she had on anything, you just don't know. I mean, if she was only here for say a week and died, then it's really more her legacy, her memory, rather than her personally that would have she wouldn't have had much of a chance to have any influence on anybody. If you
Right.
arrive in and you're dead in a week, that's not very long, is it?
Right.
Just of,
No.
No,
Well,
not at all.
what I think's kind of really, and again, if you explore more of this in the book, I apologize, but okay, so maybe not her, but if her legacy and her ancestry, obviously so much that they named the entire country of Scotland
I know,
under her,
it's
or the
crazy.
just the fact that it's interesting to find out if there is much Egyptian influence in some of the things that are currently in belief structure, or just in anything, things that current Irish, current Scottish folks do with
Mm-hmm.
within relation to Egypt. I think about just as simple as like architecture, and those are the things that, granted, I'm not a student of this, but you would think that the things that typically other cultures adapt from cultures that have come, you see it a lot in architecture, you see it a lot in music, you see it in the things that that are more expressionary. So I'm curious, just
Mm-hmm.
how much of that is got some influence. Again, I mean, I certainly don't know, but it's amazing to me, having never heard about this. In fact, I did not know that Scotland was named after, which makes 100% perfect sense now. But
Well, that's a really
yeah.
difficult question to answer. What you've just said, because um, if you think about the more ancient Irish culture, it really revolves around the number three a hell of a lot. The cosmology and the ideas of earlier, certainly the sort of the pre-Druidic culture, and sort of you can definitely say there's a sort of cosmological model of like life and the universe and how things
Mm-hmm.
are constructed. It revolves around
Mm-hmm.
3 and 9, and then you've got later on you start to see number 4 come into like theology and you know uh, cosmology and metaphysics, and I suppose what you call the occult now. So this whole thing like was called
Okay.
Hermeticism, which in Hermeticism you've got four directions and 4 elements. Okay, that all comes from ancient Egypt. So you could
Mm-hmm.
say that migrated to like Western countries, so gradually through various different forms, through the Romans and the Greeks, and then later on through the Renaissance. But then there's also a school of thought that think that that was already introduced to Ireland, quite possibly through the Egyptians, and they seem to be
Mm-hmm.
certainly. There were certainly contacts in places like Gaul between uh, the Druids and the Greeks, and it would seem there was a lot of trade between the Eastern Mediterranean and Britain, and also Ireland, mostly for metals, really
Mm-hmm.
for tin and copper and things like that, and amber coming all the
Mm-hmm.
way from Norway, even ends up in like places like Israel and Egypt, and
Oh, absolutely.
so it's quite possible there would have been some sort of like cults or religious schools that have had an influence on Irish culture, because you've got like the 4 directions, you've got the provinces, the 5 provinces, like compass points, the one in the middle. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so we don't really know the date that this kind of information, this kind of way of thinking, the fourfold model instead of the threefold model, actually hit Ireland. We don't know when that became a thing, really. So some people say, oh, it's medieval, but it could be much earlier than that. We really don't know. The first, when you get into the things being written down in the sort of Christian period, the Christians were already affected very much by the sort of Neoplatonic, Hermetic model of how things are, coming from Rome and Greece and
Mm-hmm.
Egypt, where it started. So, you know, if it got here earlier by the Egyptians, how would you possibly know? You're not going to be able
Yeah.
to actually
Yeah.
tell. Uh, I, all I can say is it's possible, but I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Right. Right.
That's one of the greatest things, is being
The
able.
great mystery.
Right.
Yeah.
The question mark is always
Uh-huh.
what drives you. It's great. Aside from the fact that it's just it's an amazing accounting and and just having that knowledge. What kind of made you want to write the book?
Well, there's a whole bunch of things, really. Various people I ran into who had mentioned Scotia. And then I remember I read Magnus Magnusson's book about Scotland. It's just called Scotland, actually, I think, which is a massive book. And he mentions her in that. And I thought, oh, yeah, that's really interesting. And then when I moved to the Dingle area, which is a long time ago now, God, that must be getting on for, that was maybe about 10 years ago, more or less. Yeah, there is mention about this place, Scotia's grave, and that. And then I got a job in Tralee, and the quickest way to get there was to drive past the monument for Scotia. So I saw it every single day on the way to work, you know.
Okay.
And I was like, oh,
Yeah,
I
that'll
think
do it.
maybe I need to go and visit this place. Actually, I think I'd already been there once at that point, and then I thought, gosh, I'll go back again. And I thought this was very interesting, but then I wrote the guy I co-wrote Kerry Folk Tales with, he'd written a version of that story, very short for that book, and I read it and I thought, so yeah, well, I think I'd like to do my own version. So when I did Dingle Folk Tales, I revisited it and just did another sort of, you know, the mythological version, from the Irish text. I kind of just modernized a bit, and you know, some of these old books, they're really tough going. You get the story, but then there's like 10 pages of like genealogy, X son of Y, son of blah blah blah, who did this and did that, and blah blah blah, and then you've got all this extra stuff in it that has no relation to the story, and it's like really hard going. So you strip out all that stuff and then reconstruct the story to tell the same story, but without all the gumph in it that's really just irrelevant. So that's what I did with this in Dingle Folk Tales book. And then I thought, hey, maybe this just kept coming up over again and over with people talking about it, or I saw videos coming up, and I thought, right, not many people have actually done a real kind of investigation into this. There's like only a couple of people that have actually done a thorough book about this. Lorraine Evans had done a book, and an American guy called Ralph Ellis. But I mean, fair play to him doing this, but I thought his book was so speculative. It was just way too like much speculation for my liking. So I thought, right, I'd go back and I'd find all the historical records from Egypt, and I had help with that. Quite a few archaeologists have helped me out with some of that part of it. Again, in Spain, I had some help from people who are experts in that area, and I'm familiar with all the Irish texts. I've got all those anyway, so I just went and looked them all up, all the references there that I could find, and the Scottish stuff. I got the original Scottish texts, and just went through it like with a fine tooth comb, like you would be if you were a detective trying to find out what happened to somebody. And then from that, I just chronologically constructed the whole story, like going through from her father through to her death, and then describe a bit about the legacy she's had, the effect she's had on modern day Ireland and Scotland as well. That's like the end of the book. But most of the book is that story from her father, what happened to him, and what created the whole situation in the first place. Because his father, Akhenaten's father, was kind of normal. Amenhotep the third, when Akhenaten was first king or pharaoh, he was Amenhotep the fourth, and then he changed his name to Akhenaten, and because of the Arten. The Arten is like his god. It's like the first monotheistic religion, probably. Because Judaism was around, but like Judaism didn't have just like it had a female and a male god really originally. At that point, maybe it had become purely just Yahweh. I'm not really sure, but because that's changed. Judaism's changed an awful lot from like the really early days through to the modern day at various points. So, at what point it became like uh, sort of a more familiar worship of just Yahweh. Because they acknowledge the existence of Elohim means the gods. It doesn't mean one God. So they chose Yahweh out of many gods to be their God. Whereas Arcanon decided there wasn't anybody else. It was just the Arton, and that is God. And it's like a solar symbol. So I go into all that in the book. But anyway, so you've got to bear in mind there's this whole pantheon of Egyptian gods and the priests of Amun Ra, and they're like the dudes. They're like, we're in charge here. And he comes along and he says, right, okay, you're all fired. Good luck. Bye bye.
Yeah, I just, just thinking about that, just a little bit of knowledge that I have versus, monotheistic thoughts and polytheistic thoughts. First of all, they couldn't be any further from being, there's no normalcy between that. So to have those two clash together would just, well, that's where wars come from.
No kidding.
It's just, that's wild. Did you find that kind of removing the exposition, that you had mentioned where you just kind of go through the whole genealogical background, did you find that kind of removing that from there, were you able to get more of that real data that some of the other predecessors that you had mentioned that didn't get to it?
Well, I think it's just the volume of stuff that I looked through, really. It's not so much if you look at the actual stories, I got the same stuff pretty much as what other people got out of it. But there's just like more things that I found that were kind of reinforcing the story, because a lot of people have neglected Spain in the story because of the Spanish language. I had some help and everything with that. Because I can't speak Spanish, but I got a little bit of help. And you go, oh, well, that's really interesting. That ties in really well. The only person who really looked at Spain, as far as I can see, was Lorraine Evans, and her work's been helpful in that respect. And there's some Spanish professors that have been and a Spanish author I know who lives in Scotland. She's been called Ness Bush. She's been very helpful as well. So, I pulled in favors from people, help in the areas where I knew I was weak, that I would struggle with the Egypt stuff and the Spanish stuff. I thought, well, I need to do this right. I need someone who's more expert in that to help me to get the right bits, and then I can put it all together. So I pulled from loads of different strands all together, and it kind of, all these things just reinforce the whole story, really. When you look at it all together, the conventional wisdom really was the Egyptians were like very advanced, but they didn't really go anywhere. They didn't do a whole lot. They just had wars locally, and that was the end of it. And then eventually they got, taken over by the Greeks, and then the Romans were there, and then that was the end of it. It was part of the Byzantine Empire, and then the Muslim Empire, and there you go. But the reality is they actually did make like ocean-going vessels, and they did go out of the Mediterranean. They did explore places, and so did a lot of the ancient peoples, like the Mycenaeans and the Phoenicians. Sailing up into northern Europe and down around the coast of Africa and things like that. So this stuff is all just ignored to a large extent. It's like, I saw a documentary about the Chinese fleets. Oh my gosh, incredible! Like the biggest ships in the world at the time, long before Columbus, much bigger, like 6 times the size of Columbus's ships. They circumnavigated the world before the Europeans did. And that story's just not told. It's like people, they've got this really narrow focus. This is how it is, and anything that doesn't fit, they just actually literally ignore it, even though there might be 100% irrefutable evidence that X happened, they go, well, no, X never happened because it ruins my theory. A and B is ruined by the existence of X. So we're just going to pretend that never happened. We're going to ignore it.
Absolutely.
And there's a lot of that going on
Yeah.
with this story, I think, with the story of
Yeah.
Scotia, because it's very inconvenient. If it's true, it really kind of messes up a lot of orthodox historical thinking, you know?
Right, right. And that's okay because that's true history. My favorite thing here in the States is, you know, we grew up in elementary school. Christopher Columbus discovered America, right? Our whole childhood, that's what we're told until we get to college and then forget everything you were told.
Yeah.
It's not true.
Yeah.
These people were here before, these people were here before, and these people. I mean, it's crazy that they do that. I don't understand what the
I mean, there's so
purpose is.
much wrong there because I watched Graham Hancock's program and these guys, and they find these footprints of humans like going back, what, 28,000 years ago. And what about the Vikings, you know? That if they were there
Absolutely.
like for 500 years before the Chinese even, and they were there before Columbus. And like, so it's like a whole bunch of people that were there before Columbus, you know?
Oh, yeah.
I think a lot of it is what you said. You know, anytime you kind of move and shift paradigm, it disrupts. And people just can't deal with that disruption, which is unfortunate because I think a lot of stuff gets lost. You know, and you had mentioned they had these great sea-bearing ships. Well, in my personal opinion, and I've known this for a while, that the Egyptian influence can be kind of traced kind of around the world of a lot of things that Egyptians have brought in. And it always makes me laugh. I'm like, okay, well, hold on a second. If we're all going to agree for just a second, which I do believe, I don't think the aliens built the pyramids. I love ufology. I'm a UFO person, but they didn't build the pyramids. We know that. So if we're all going to agree that the Egyptian people built these amazing pyramids and built the Sphinx and built all these amazing monuments, that they couldn't build a ship?
No.
I mean, call me dumb, but you know, you would think if these people are that good, that they, in fact, they even believe that they got some of that stuff going through the Nile to get some of that stuff where it needed to be. So if they can move these enormous, you know, gigantic blocks, they couldn't build a ship that could go across the sea is just asinine to me.
Yeah.
Well, it's whoever's writing the history. That's what it is. Whoever has the most power at the time writes the history and covers the rest of it up. Yeah. That's what happens.
Yeah. Unfortunately, it's a lot like many areas of life where, you know, there's an orthodoxy that everyone's supposed to accept, and then whoever's brave enough to challenge that is going to get absolutely slapped down. You can see it in medicine, all kinds of science, in archaeology, you know, even in art. Like some guy comes along and he ends up chopping off his ear and he's eating his own paints. And then like 100 years later, he's the most famous, loved artist in the entire world. Everyone's going, oh my God.
I know.
And that you can buy like mugs with sunflowers on and all that. And, you know, I've been to the museum there in Amsterdam, and it's absolutely full of people. It's just totally full of people the whole day, all day long, every day, all year round. And yet in his own lifetime, everyone was going, what's this shit? This is a load of crap. He never sold one painting in his whole life.
No.
You know?
He was like looking at his work
and going, what are you on? You must be mad.
Well, yeah. I mean, there was a lot to say about that, and he was so destitute that, you know, of course he wasn't appreciated in those times.
So, I mean, that's just a silly example of this way of looking at things. You know, when you really want to push the envelope and just go, hey, how about doing this differently and this about that? People really resist it. Like the first guy to come up with the idea of hygiene, I forget his name. It's a really long, difficult name. I think he was Hungarian. He ended up in a mental asylum for suggesting that people wash their hands. Like, you know, they told him he was an idiot and all his theories were wrong, and convinced him that he was nuts. and he got put in he died in a
Wow.
mental asylum, and he was so right. And now he's like, recognized as a pioneer of
Right.
medicine
He's
and
revered
hygiene and all this stuff. But in his own time,
yeah.
they locked him up, and he died in a mental
Yeah.
institution.
It's
It's like,
amazing.
that's so tragic. Like, but you've got this same
Yeah.
thinking. Obviously, there's crazy ideas, and like people got these mad theories about, the Great Pyramids, a nuclear reactor or something. You're like, yeah, that stuff's all
Yeah.
insane. But like, but
Yeah, it is.
the whole thing of, I think it's better to allow people to be a bit nuts and just put those ideas out there, even if they're crazy, rather than to just say, no, no
Mhm.
one can think differently. No one can challenge this. No one can disagree. And you're just shut down straight away. Obviously, if you apply logic, the more wacko theories, you're going to realize that they don't work and it's crazy. But that doesn't mean that
Right.
100%.
you kind of just have to like blanket ban everything from being challenged, which is what a lot of these people in academia or whatever, on the mainstream, they just shoot down everything. Don't
Yeah.
Mhm.
Well, I
Agreed.
think
Yeah.
I think that and I know it's not just in the States. I've, been in the military. I've had the luxury of going all over the world. So it isn't just an American thought process, but we all seem to suffer from an all or nothing problem.
Mm.
So
Mhm.
it's either you digest it in whole and kind of, whether it's through dogmatic thinking that you have to accept it all, or the fact that you can't look at something in pieces and realize, okay, I don't know how on board I am with X, but I can totally back this particular part. And I think that is one of the fallacies of human existence, that, okay, granted, we're a show about paranormal, which just has nothing to do with it, but I think that's where we run into problems, because in order to have true innovation and in order to be able to do those sort of things, you need to be able to disrupt. And if you can't disrupt, then there is no innovation.
Mhm.
If you are so scared in your dogmatic ways that if somebody comes along that has some kind of different, okay, we'll even say political. We don't do politics on the show, but I'm just going to say it. Even on a political basis, if you're not on one side and you're on another side, all the great things that have ever happened, even politically, have happened from people that are like, okay, this dude might be nuts, but hang on a second. Look at X, X, and X. That makes perfect sense. Do I buy all these other things? Certainly not. But can we look at some of this and adapt to it? It happens in technology. It happens in everything. That the true innovators have always been the people that are capable of being able to get outside of the box and still be able to talk to the masses.
I mean, you look at electricity, and you look at like the TV, the radio, all these things. If you said, well, if you went back far enough and you say, hey, I've got this idea, I'm gonna make this little box, and maybe I can have a picture in it of me, and then you can be somewhere else, and this stuff will fly through the air and go to the other box, and you'll be able to see me. And they go, right, go
Mhm.
get the key and put this guy in the loony bin and lock him in
Right.
to throw the key away on this guy, you know. Perhaps
Right.
like
Yeah.
John
Yeah.
Logie Baird, Scottish inventor. He made the first TV. I mean, he thought I was going to
Mhm.
be an educational tool, but didn't really turn out.
Wow. Missed the mark on that one a little.
Yeah.
How you thought it would.
Right.
Well, we perverse the crap out of that. I mean,
Yeah.
you give humanity anything that allow them to sit and do jack shit for hours, they're going to perverse it somehow. They're going to do
true.
something to it that's not good.
Yeah, but it's just
man.
that's kind of also, it would seem like magic to people back in the day,
Yeah.
and say that's not possible. That's
Oh
not.
yeah.
There's so many things about the world, about existence, about our own selves, even that we don't understand. We're only really getting to understand now some of this stuff about how the mind works, the brain, whatever the sort of things like ESP, etc.,
Consciousness.
which people have been like, you either got to be burned as a heretic or you're crazy or whatever. Yeah. And now we see like, oh gosh, both the Russians and the Americans spent like billions on investigating all this stuff. So if I was a load of hokum, then why would they spend like, 20 billion on investigating sort of remote viewing or something? if it was such a load
Oh
of
yeah,
old
the men that stare at
rubbish,
goats. Yeah.
so a lot of this stuff they
Mhm.
don't want to publicly admit about things being actually the way they are. They actually do know certain things are true. I mean, again, with the
Oh,
world of
yeah.
archaeology, these people who are great authorities, sometimes they know that something's true, but they're just not going to admit it because it's
Mhm.
not convenient. And you've got that throughout history, where I think probably since we became like civilized people, I suppose, where if it didn't suit your agenda and you thought it might affect your money or your power or your influence, you just quietly just move that out into the corner where no one can see it and just hope everyone
Mhm.
forgets. And people do forget
That's
about
right.
stuff. Actually, it's amazing how
Yeah, they do.
quickly,
Yeah.
if you just shunt something into the corner, look at Göbekli Tepe. That only
Mhm.
really became a mainstream thing. Was in the last 5-10 years, really. That guy
Yeah.
discovered
Yeah.
that like 1987 or something.
Yeah.
I know.
Yeah.
Schmidt,
That's
So
crazy.
Professor Schmidt.
crazy.
It's like he's dead now, of course, but like, look how long it took
Mhm.
to make it through to public
Yeah.
consciousness. You know?
It's only when it's palatable for them at the time. That's all it
Yeah.
comes
Yeah.
down to.
Mhm.
But well, listen, writing the book. I'm gonna go back to the book for just a second because I think honestly, Luke, you, myself, and Nicole could probably have a show for years on all this stuff that we feel about this stuff. But
Mhm.
as far as the book itself, was there kind of obviously? So we're kind of getting towards the end here. Is there something that you discovered kind of in the I don't know, in the journey, because I've often talked to people, of course, we talk to a lot of authors, but we've talked to a lot of authors that say that writing is cathartic and it always opens up either new questions or answers questions. Was there something from this particular book that kind of gave you that, oh shit, or that, oh my gosh, I did not expect that? Was there anything, or was there more
Yeah,
than one?
well, there's a couple of things. Well, first there was the whole thing about the voyages, because like I had, the orthodoxy was like the Egyptians built the first like proper boats, but they only used them to go up and down the Nile, like you said, and transport stuff. So the orthodoxy is,
Mhm.
they didn't go out very far. They were bad sailors, and well, I mean, in a military perspective, they weren't really very good. As a navy, that's true. But like,
Mm-hmm.
merchant shipping and being like a warships are two different things, aren't they? So you don't have to
Mhm.
be like a brilliant, I don't know, uh, who was a brilliant tactician on the water. I don't know, but you wouldn't have to be like this amazing admiral type to be able to go off to another
Yeah, for us it'd be
country.
like
Uh,
for us it'd be like Admiral
yeah,
Halsey or somebody like
yeah. You
that.
just need a
Yeah.
Mhm.
seagoing vessel. It doesn't have to be full of weapons. You're just going off to get stuff and come back. Obviously, probably back in the day, you'd want to have a few people with, you know, some kind of weapons in case you got attacked. Um,
Yeah.
but so that was all a fallacy. That I used to believe that orthodoxy, and then going through all the research and the book, and the replicas of the Egyptian boats were built in the late '60s and stuff. That's all detailed in the book. I'm just like, oh my god, it's amazing. So
Mm-hmm.
they weren't the
Mhm.
only people who were building like ships that were seagoing. Like I said before, the Mycenaeans and um, oh gosh, the guys from Carthage and all that. What they called again? Anyway, I forget the name. There's a whole bunch of different peoples from that time who were building sophisticated boats, but it was the Egyptians, it seems, that came up with the first like really sophisticated boats, and before then the Mesopotamians were building boats, really kind of not very
Mhm.
complex ones. But like it was the Egyptians who perfected like the wooden slatted boats, that were planking. That was the Egyptians who come
Mhm.
up with all that. So it
Mm-hmm.
seems a bit
Wow.
stupid that they wouldn't bother. They go, "Oh, we've just invented this amazing like new type of boat, but we won't bother to use it. We'll just go up and down the
Right.
Nile, like
That makes perfect sense.
Just look at
yeah,
it.
just sit here and look at our lovely creation, and we won't bother
Yeah.
to go
Yeah.
anywhere in it.
Yeah.
It's just
It's
so
just so funny.
ridiculous. Like,
It
but
really
the
Yeah.
other
is.
thing
It's
I
so
I came across was something at Scotty's grave, which was When you go, people actually make a mistake quite often. They look at this big rock with the mostly graffiti on it. That's where the Om symbol would have been, the Om writing, which is gone because probably been dissolved by time. But the actual graves are a little bit further up from this big rock, so not everyone goes to the right place. But in the center, there's one central rock, which is about, you think in feet, do you? Feet rather than centimeters?
Yeah.
So it's probably about
Yes.
maybe 2 foot by 2 foot, or a little bit smaller than that, maybe. So in normal weather, you can't see it, but when it's really heavy rain, and I've been there many times and been there in the pouring rain, really pouring rain, you got, what's those funny marks? It's got these strange lines and stuff on it. And I'm like, that's really weird. So I took a bunch of photographs, and then, I've gone into that in the book, the analysis of what this is. This is not random. This is being done by somebody. Somebody has carved these lines and shapes into this rock in the middle of what's supposed to be a grave. And some people say, oh, no, it's not a grave. It's just a bunch of stones, and somebody just put them there for no good reason. So, I mean, that people tend to not put in loads of effort to like get a big load of stones and put a big stone in the middle and a ring around them, and then bother to carve stuff on the stone for absolutely no reason at all. Like, maybe we're just like, I'm a bit bored today. I'm just gonna let's just do some random thing in the middle of nowhere. Yeah.
Especially at that time, because getting rock and getting all that there at that particular time, it's not like they had an excavator. They couldn't just put it
there. The rocks
there.
might just be locally gathered, and they may have been hastily done, but like obviously it was done for some reason, not just for like out of boredom or like, people, like you say, people don't just do stuff like that for fanciful reasons. I mean, life was hard, time was valuable. People didn't just do stuff for, in a sort of frivolous way like they might do now,
Yeah,
exactly. Yeah.
So that was quite shocking.
Everything was done with purpose.
It would be good if someone were to go back there and do like proper analysis with like sort of X-rays or some other kind of
like LiDAR.
Like ground penetrating radar.
About the LiDAR.
Maybe someone should go and dig up the grave and excavate it properly and find if there is a body underneath there, because they have got Tutankhamun's body, they've got Akhenaten's body. I think they might even have Nefertiti's body. Right?
They believe so now, yes.
And like, if there's someone buried there and they can do a DNA test and go, hey, hang on, this
100%.
person is directly related to Tutankhamun. That's Tutankhamun's sister. That's Akhenaten's daughter. That's Nefertiti's daughter. And if they could do that, they go, wow, then its story is 100% irrefutably true, So,
that's true.
But I mean, no one's really interested to go there at the moment. It is a difficult place to get to. You kind of go through a load of mud and cross these little tiny bridges, which are just narrow enough for one person. It's not an easy place to get to. And like, you really need some Wellington boots or big hiking boots, because you're going to be up to your ears in mud. If you go any other time that it's not like being dry for a week or two, it's like pretty. It's not like a fun walk. It's a bit tough going.
Right.
But when you get there,
it would be worth it.
But I mean, so maybe part of it is like not wanting to have to try and lug all this gear down there and have to helicopter in like a load of stuff or whatever, because it isn't accessible by car or truck or anything like that, So I think that might be something to do with it as well.
Sure.
Well, maybe your book will inspire a future archaeologist to want to find out.
I would be so happy.
And I would imagine that
even if they said, "No, you're wrong," but it'd be nice to know if I am wrong. Well, fair play. I want to know the truth, regardless of whether it's my version or someone else's. I'd like to know: is there anyone buried there? And if so, who are they?
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
That's amazing.
That's the challenge. Prove me wrong.
Exactly. I don't mind being wrong, but tell me why.
Yeah,
You know?
exactly.
Well, Luke, listen, I know that
I'm excited to
I'm
read
excited
it.
to read
Yeah.
it. And I know we don't know exactly when it comes out, but when it does, we'll absolutely
it is
update our
out
listeners.
in March, but I
Oh,
haven't
okay.
got the
Oh,
exact
okay.
date for you right this moment. So it's sort of like
Sure.
very soon, but yeah. But I'll make sure to let you know the exact date of publication anyway.
Yep, and we'll definitely let everybody know that.
Mhm.
But other than that, I every time you come and talk to us, it's amazing. So
I learned so much
I
from
do
you.
learn a lot,
I
and
really
it
enjoyed
was
it.
an
It's
absolute
been,
honor.
as you say here, it's good crack. But I mean, I have to be careful that word. It has different meaning, doesn't it? In some countries.
Oh yeah, well, I mean, good crack here in the U.S. can mean a lot of different things, but I get where you're going.
Yeah, we know the meaning.
We get the intent. But well, listen, thanks again for coming on. We had a great time, and hope to get you back on soon.
Thank you so much for having me back, and I've really enjoyed it, and I'd love to come on again. Maybe when I have another one. That will be a little while though. It
Yeah.
took me 3 years of work to do this book.
Jeez, yeah, for sure.
I can imagine so. That's a lot
Yeah.
of research to do.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, again, thanks, Luke, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thanks a million. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thanks, Luke, for coming back on.
Yeah, thank you, Luke. It was good talking to you again.
Yeah, it was a good time. You know, was this show potentially paranormal? Not in the traditional sense, I'll give you that. But the mystery behind it is very paranormal. If you think about it just in the sense that, like he was talking about, them traveling, going on the open sea, which I clearly believe they did.
Yeah. Well, a lot of the spiritual ties of Egypt kind of coincide, I think, with a lot of the pagan and druid and all those things go together. So I'm interested to actually read the book and see what he actually talks about. Obviously, we couldn't spoil it.
No.
We want everyone to read it, and I want to read it, so I'm excited to see that. But and I had heard previously about Scotia.
I hadn't.
So it is interesting.
Yeah.
It is interesting. Yes.
And I think that the namesake of Scotland comes from that.
I know.
mean, it's just...
And from someone that wasn't alive very long,
I know.
It's so crazy how that stuff happens.
Which again tells me there had to have been a ton of influence.
Yeah, I think there's a lot more than we know.
Yeah.
But to find the evidence of it, like he was saying, it's very difficult. So, but I'm so interested in reading about his research because he seems to be one of the first ones to really dive into it. So.
Yeah, he had mentioned there had been some others, but he's kind of gotten more into the weeds, so to speak.
Yeah,
so.
So
But,
very, very cool.
Yeah, listen, guys, tell us what you think. Check out the book, and we're happy you joined us, and we'll talk to you next time.
Yeah, we'll make sure and put the links to the book in the episode notes. We don't, as of this moment, know what date it's coming out, but we'll make sure and put all that on our Facebook page, show notes, and everywhere that we share the video. So make sure and click on it, buy his book, reach out to him. He's very, easy to talk to.
Super approachable.
Yes. So reach out with questions because I'm sure he'd love to talk to you about them.
Absolutely.
So, all right. Well,
see you next week.
Thanks for tuning in to Generation X Paranormal. Remember, all editing is done in-house and we're a self-funded podcast, so your support truly makes a difference. Like, subscribe, and follow us on all socials to stay connected. Special thanks to Eric Cooley for creating our music. And don't forget to check out our Patreon for exclusive content and ways to help us keep the show going. Until next time, stay curious and keep exploring the unexplained.